Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you have filled your boots, as they say here in the Maritimes. Sorry, the Atlantic. We must be specific. So welcome back. We are a few minutes late, but we're going to just roll with it. So the first up, we're going to be having some vendor presentations. So this morning, you all had the opportunity to talk with each other around the different systems you're using and what's working, what are the challenges, what are your workarounds, what do you want to see in the future. Now's the chance to hear from the vendors of where they see resource sharing going in the future, their roadmaps, their vision for resource sharing. So we are going to have our two vendor representative in the room. So we are going to hear from Clarivate, slash Ex Libris, whichever name you like to use. And then we're going to hear from OCLC. So first up, we're going to hear from Katy Aronoff, who is the Director of Solution Consulting in Clarivate. And then we're going to hear from Peter Collins, Director of Resource Sharing in OCLC. So Katy, take it away.
Thank you. I'm one of several Katys here today, both in person and virtually. I answer to anything. I come from a big family with a lot of cousins, so you can call me anything and I will probably respond. I don't mind. Really happy to be here with all of you today in Halifax. I was telling Andre that I'm not sure I've been to Nova Scotia since the 80s when we went on like a kind of a famous family vacation. I can tell everybody about that later, but it's a real treat to be here. I live in the Boston area and there's such a strong connection between our two regions that I saw somebody in a Bruins shirt yesterday and I did a double take and then I remembered where I was. So in some ways it feels very familiar. I'm going to speak now about the vision that we have for the future of resource sharing. And I want to emphasize, going to the next slide here, attempting to go to the next slide. There we go. I want to emphasize that what we're talking about really, it is a vision in the sense that some of this has been put into place already or is in the process of being put into place. And some of this is an ideal future state. And there are dependencies here. As we were saying this morning, there are technological dependencies, there are financial considerations, there are things happening in the community and in the world that may drive the direction of where some of this vision lands in a practical sense. But I really want to think about this in terms of an ideal future state for resource sharing as we see it coming from Clarivate. Let me see. I will figure out the clicker eventually by the end of this. So moving through the pillars here, the first one deals with openness and transparency. So this is really foundational. We're in this pillar emphasizing the importance of open systems that are accessible and also understandable to all stakeholders. That's libraries, their staff, their patrons, everybody alike. We are really doing a lot of thinking about clear best practices, the elimination of hidden costs in resource sharing to foster trust and collaboration among libraries. We will think a little bit about peer-to-peer models and the ways in which that can facilitate that. We really want you to be able to make informed decisions, engage with partners really directly and effectively, but also to have a degree of local autonomy and local decision making. If I can kind of take you back to the early days of ALMA, I think some of you were present for the early days of ALMA. The resource sharing model that we supported at that time was based on open standards, the ISO 10161 standard, NCIP integration that was available. We were speaking a little bit about that this morning in the context of integrating with Relay via NCIP. But one of the things that I want to place a little bit of context around that I think maybe sometimes gets lost in the historical shuffle is the landscape that everyone had been coming from before that. So these earlier ISO standards for ILL, as they were used by ILSs specifically, that was not a common use case in North America. I think many of you probably remember this. We supported ISO ILL messages because it was something that Aleph had supported. I don't know if we have any former Aleph librarians in the room here. I'm trying not to go too deep into the weeds of like ancient ILS history, but in some ways this is really relevant. And it also has to do with the global character of resource sharing. That what we do here in North America and the US and Canada in like slightly different ways has a lot in common with Australia, as we saw this morning, but the practice of this is different in other parts of the world. In the UK, it's quite different. I do a lot of work with libraries in Latin America, and the standard practice for most people there is to call the other library and ask if they will ship the book. It's not automated at all, and there are reasons for that, but we are in the position in the vendor world of needing to meet everybody where they are and provide different options and different connections to do that. So some of the early work with resource sharing standards, I think, speaks to that, the need to implement different things in different places and also at different times. What we're able to do now with ALMA resource sharing is so completely different than what was even a figment of somebody's imagination in like 2014 or so. There's been a lot of work that's been done within the community to do that. This is really very heavily community-based work. We heard from Alan Jones this morning. Everybody knows Alan, and he's been a real force with getting the different communities to work together, to think about innovation in terms of patron outcomes and things like that. So the standards allow us to really foster innovation and integrate with other systems. Where it's possible, wherever possible, we want to integrate with systems and networks so that the library staff, all of you, can work from within a single interface. We've heard so far today how important that is. We'll talk a little bit more about this and the role of the community as we move throughout the discussion. I want to spend a moment thinking about what we mean by informed decisions. This is really enabled by openness and transparency. You need to be able to understand all of your resource sharing activity in order to make decisions about things like the partners and suppliers that you work with, the formats of materials that you're requesting, turnaround times, what you'll prioritize, maybe even parts of your collection that you'll lend and that you won't. When I worked in libraries, that would change from time to time. We learned at one point, the library where I was working, that we were the only one within our consortium that was lending out test prep books. And as a result, our test prep books were never actually available for our local patrons. So we had to stop doing that. You know, you need to be able to understand the flow of requests with granularity, and then you can really see the value of your systems, especially if you're working in different networks. Being able to bring that together in some sense of transparency and openness allows you to make decisions. Okay, I think we thought we were addressing the issue. Oh no, there goes the text. All right. It's back. Okay. I'm kind of a disaster with PowerPoint animations. I think everybody's now finding that out. Peer-to-peer collaboration is a really critical pillar of our vision. This is the idea of direct sharing between libraries without intermediaries and fostering a sense of shared ownership through that work. It allows you to really pool resources. I hear more people thinking these days, talking out loud about the idea of collective collections within some of the regional networks, within states and provinces, in situations where there may be a shared print model in place. Peer-to-peer relationships allow us to do this and to be able to respond to challenges when they arrive in a collective way. So something like the challenge of physical buildings shutting down during the pandemic and the lack of availability of certain resources is something that when we have strong collaborative relationships, we can work more effectively together to solve. It also allows us to build in scalability and resilience into our networks because everybody is contributing to and benefiting from the system. I'm going to return to that model in a moment, but I want you to think about that idea of both giving to and getting things from the resource sharing system. We at Ex Libris, I am going to mix Ex Libris and Clarivate in my terminology. I don't always know where I work, let alone what I should call the company. But specifically coming from the tradition of Ex Libris, if any of you also came up through the world of innovative, there's a strong history of partnerships between us and the library community. A lot of this happens through Illuna. I know that I have seen a number of you at Illuna in the past, and the IGLU, the international user group that really supports libraries in the rest of the world. And I think what people sometimes don't always realize going into something like Illuna is that Illuna is its own community. We have essentially a business agreement with them, but they are a self-governing user group that's independent of us as a company. So we've made certain commitments to Illuna for things like the development of enhancements, but it really is a community-led organization that supports things like the product working groups, various focus and advisory groups, and also the regional user groups that we attend as guests. I went to the Northeast Regional User Group last week in the Boston area. There were about 150 librarians from, I think, Pennsylvania on up to Maine, probably. And they were meeting and sharing best practices, and they invite us to come and speak at that on their terms, essentially. So the Rapido product working group sits within the auspices of Illuna and IGLU. There's a Rapid ILL product working group, and these are really important to the development of the product. Our community also really goes above and beyond, I think, what we might expect through things like voting on enhancements and meetings and things like that. We worked in really close partnership with the product working group and with the Cal State system. If any of you know Chris Lee from the Cal State system, Tim Jackson from the SUNY system, who has done so much personally really to advance the peer-to-peer model within ALMA, they sat down with our product team to think about how those peer-to-peer connections could be simplified and implemented in ways that were more transparent, easier to understand, and also to bridge potential gaps between ALMA resource sharing and other systems. So we have now, some of you may be aware of this, the hybrid pod model with Rapido and ALMA resource sharing, where you can be a member of a pod that's a group of libraries from the Rapid ILL terminology that includes Rapido libraries and ALMA libraries working together. It really brings groups into the same place to be able to connect more easily and to share resources in real time. This is in place in Australia. There are a number of these springing up around the world and in places where people want to be able to work together. All right, I'm trying again with the clicker. Okay. Value-driven networks is the next really critical pillar that I want to speak about. And the most important thing to think about here is that this is value as defined by you. It is not value as defined by me or anybody else at Ex Libris. It is the value that you derive as you measure it and as you see it from participation in a resource sharing network. This could be outcomes like increased usage. We heard about that this morning, that when you put requesting options in front of people, they often take advantage of them, sometimes in ways that you don't anticipate. It could be improved staff efficiency. We've heard from a number of libraries that Rapido and Rapid ILL can really have an impact on staff efficiency or measurable impact on your community in some way. But we leave the exact definition of that in your hands. We really believe that the networks have to be responsible, networks that exist, that is, have to be responsive to the needs of their members. And provide tools that are really useful and that enhance resource sharing and what users are getting out of this. By putting the value, the definition of value with the community, this makes sure that the network evolves in ways that make sense for you and that support your needs in alignment with where libraries are going and able to respond and scale quickly to that. So this is a culture of continuous improvement and adaptation. If you think about, as an example of this, because I don't want to speak just in abstract terms, we want to talk in real ways about how people are realizing value. If you think about Rapid ILL as a value-driven network, what does that mean? We now have around 800 members of the Rapid ILL community in about 30 countries. Since Ex Libris acquired Rapid from Colorado State in 2019, that number, the number of members, has grown 2.5 times. It's a scale that can be supported by the network that we have now, and the changes in the world since then have really enabled that. The member libraries, when they join, all agree to borrow and lend from each other. Sometimes people will say, well, can I just borrow from Rapid ILL? And we say, really, we expect that everybody is doing both, that you're supporting both sides of the transaction to provide benefit to the community as well as derive benefit. They don't charge each other, and they agree to fill requests within 24 hours. We know that in reality, and I know many of you are probably aware of this, the average is now less than 10 hours for requests to be fulfilled within the Rapid ILL network, but the kind of service level agreement is 24 hours, and people are very serious about committing to that. Yes, there is a subscription to this. This is a product that people pay for, but they're deriving tangible benefits from participating in this network. And librarians that I talk to really, they love this. They feel like they get a lot of value from it for the money that they are paying to subscribe to the software and to be part of the network. So it really is a value-driven network that's member-centered because they're aligning on how they use the service and what they put into it and get out of it. Finally, or maybe not quite finally, but moving towards the end here, I want to think a little bit about equity and choice in the context of a resource sharing ecosystem. We really want to be able to build a fair and inclusive resource sharing ecosystem. You as libraries should be able to choose the networks and the tools that meet your needs. We don't want anybody to be constrained by paywalls or proprietary systems. This is about promoting a level playing field where the access is really dependent. It's determined by value and relevance and not the size of your budget. We think about equity in the sense of making sure that everybody has options that meet their needs. It may not be the exact same landscape of systems for each library, but whatever your needs are, we want you to have access to systems and services that meet those needs. We have the vision that a library can use Rapido and connect with as many systems and networks as they choose to be active in, with that as the central hub. And we all know that business and technology models sometimes make this a little bit harder than maybe we would like, but the vision is that you should be able to do that. Again, we want to give you access to the sources that you need based on value and relevance, rather than necessarily just looking at the size of your budget. We've heard a lot today from smaller libraries, and I think this is really important to emphasize. On the technology side, the way that the technology itself handles the requests and conceives of the network is important. Load balancing is a really critical part of this, especially within larger networks or networks where you may have a mix of different types and sizes of members. Very large members can sometimes have a distorting effect on a network if we're not careful. So we have load balancing in Rapido and in Rapid to make sure that all libraries can participate, be active members of the community, and not really think of this so much in terms of, are you a net lender, are you a net borrower, but are you participating? Are you receiving value? Are you helping other people? Now I really will be wrapping up in earnest and thinking about, I guess, challenging all of us a little bit. And I think that's what today is really about, is getting everybody sitting down together and in the room and thinking about what are we doing now versus what could we be doing in the future. I want to think about disrupting some of the legacy models. I think the reason that we're here is because that is in process already through different sources and for different reasons. The models that many of us have been using for a long time are changing. Technology is changing. Systems that we once relied on may not be there in the future. The needs of our users are changing. I mean, I don't think that I am necessarily different from anybody else, that when I want something from the library, I just want it to be there. Like, I don't want to have to wait around. I want to find a way to get it quickly. And all of these things are driving change and forcing us to reconsider our models. From the Ex Libris Clarivate perspective, we see this happening in different places around the world in different ways. We see libraries responding to that challenge in different ways. And I want to kind of set forth a challenge to all of you as well as to ourselves, that from our perspective, we are seeking to challenge ourselves to rethink the status quo, to do things differently, to innovate, and if something doesn't work, to be able to move on from that quickly, to fail fast, as they say. Rapido is part of that thinking. The great work that was done by the Rapid ILL team before we acquired them has been foundational to that. But what we're really talking about is implementing a value-driven network with Rapido that presents alternatives to libraries, giving you the opportunity to enable staff to work within a single tool for resource sharing and creating a ecosystem that meets the needs of people where they are today, moving beyond legacy models. I'll give you an example, something that we introduced within the last year. I'm never great with remembering dates of exactly when these things came out, but it was earlier this calendar year, with the ability to lend whole ebooks. So we have a pod of libraries within Rapido. It's the DRM-free ebook pod. If you have DRM-free ebooks available that you can lend, if your license agreements permit it, you can join this pod, and it's PDFs being sent back and forth. If a user wants an ebook and you have it and you are able to lend it, you can simply send them the DRM-free PDF. We're doing a lot of thinking with the community about ways to scale that in the future. Obviously, the licensing models are an issue, but it is in place today. This is the product of, I think, at least 5 years of thinking and proof of concept and working with other vendors, working with libraries, but it's in place. It is quite popular, and it's meeting the needs of users, who don't necessarily understand the restrictions around this type of content that we face. I'm sure that I'm not the only one. Like, I sort of serve as a personal reference librarian to friends and family and sometimes strangers on the internet. I want to charge people like $5 every time I answer a question. That people don't seem to be willing to pay me for that. But, and I get a lot of questions about why do ebooks work the way they work in libraries. Being able to align what we have a bit more with user expectations, I think, is a part of the work that we can do to get people into libraries and using our services, and to maybe just put things in front of them and they don't have to worry so much about, where do I go to request this? What do I click on? If my library is part of multiple networks, how do I know I'm using the right one? And my personal favorite, I don't want to create more work for the library staff. I've heard that from people I know, and I say, don't worry about it. They will figure it out. That's their job. They're getting paid to be there and do the work for you. So if you need something, request it in the way that makes sense to you. So we're in this very dynamic moment with the models that are in place and the ones that are coming into being. And I think my challenge to all of us is, how can we think about this in a way that puts our users at the center? And users can be both staff users and patrons. But I think that sometimes when we're talking about system level change, the patron gets a little bit lost in that. So that is the challenge I would issue to all of us, is what is the ideal state we want to be at the end of all this transition? Who do we want to have at the center, and what needs to be done to make that happen? And with that, I will wrap up. Thanks, everybody.